I want to talk just lastly about a piece you wrote a couple, I guess, 10 days ago, 11 days ago, about the waning days of the special relationship between the United States and Israel, because it has been my theory, I've talked about in this program probably for close to a decade, that this is what was going to happen. That and it would, frankly, was my argument with right-wing sort of supportive Jews of Israel in this country, is that the biggest threat to Israel is going to be the worst thing the United States can do is to allow Israel to move further down this path, because it's going to ultimately undercut support for Israel in this country. And we're going to have a country that is going to be pariah-ish, not unlike, South Africa, but frankly, led by a much more entranced leadership, and they're going to be isolated. And it sort of feels like, well, your argument here is that may be happening. Can you talk about that dynamic, but also in the context of what we're hearing with this mission that Tony Blinken's been on since starting in June, theoretically bridging some type of peace between Saudi Arabia and Israel, and maybe, just hoping the Palestinians go away?
I'm not a political correspondent, so my understanding of the Blink of all these peace campaign with Saudi Arabia is more, I think, by the Biden administration to press Netanyahu to go for government with Benny Gantz and Yair Lapid, throw away the more extremists like Ben Gvir and Smotrich and go for government with Benny Gantz. I don't think it's politically possible from either side. As to what I wrote, I think, this is my understanding, is that the special relationship between the US and Israel is based more than on strategic value of Israel, strategic importance in terms of military, more of Israel portraying itself and to the world and to the American public as the only democracy in the Middle East. And that was really the main, the forte, the thing that really was the most, the strongest thing. Now, Israel was never a democracy from 48 and certainly since 67. But I think the US could have ignored this part of its being undemocratic towards its Palestinian citizens or Palestinian under occupation, because they were the others. They were these Muslims, Third World, Middle Eastern, brown. So violence against them was not encouraged, but tolerated in a way. From the moment that the Israeli government is repressing its own citizens, its own white citizens, then I think for the American, especially I think for the Democratic administration, for the Jews, for the liberal Jews and progressive Jews in the US, very, very difficult to accept this kind of democracy and call it the only democracy in the Middle East. And I think what is the real problem for Israel is, again, not cutting the military aid, although I read the ex-ambassadors to Israel talking about it. But I think the military aid is less important. What is really important is the political coverage that the US has always given Israel in the UN Security Council, in the ICC, in the ICJ, in all these international organizations that they veto, even in FIFA, in football. if Israel will be expelled from FIFA because they have teams in the West Bank that are playing in the Israeli league, and FIFA was not happy with that. And there was a move to expel Israel from FIFA, and then the US intervened, and they were not expelled. So this political umbrella given by the US administrations for decades, Republican and Democratic, what is the real asset for Israel? And not the military aid, because in order to control 3.5 million Palestinians, you don't need F-35. You don't need, very sophisticated aircrafts, or you need basically soldiers that act as police. You don't need a lot of money for that. So the aid in itself is less important. What is important is the political aid. And if this aid is somehow jeopardized, Israel is in big, big trouble.
Yeah, and I mean, we had a guest on, I guess, a month or two ago speaking about how Israel's weapons industry is now 10th in the world in terms of exports. So like they have their own self-sustaining mechanism at this point. But to your point about the political cover, do you think that that's been a motivating factor in why Israel has been meeting with other international leaders? I mean, they're trying to cozy up now to Saudi Arabia. Clearly, they're developing a relationship with Narendra Modi. I'm not sure what the status of it when they're meeting with China as well. Are they feeling the heat internally? If they're feeling that like Biden's cooling on the relationship?
I think yes. Yes, generally speaking, yes. Israel, in a way, first of all, it has become a really Middle Eastern country, in the sense that its regime and the regime they want to establish is not that far from the regime in Egypt or in not Saudi Arabia maybe, but in Egypt and other undemocratic states in the region. And then, yes, I think there is this, they are viewing an opportunity, if it's possible, to go with Erdogan in Turkey, with Putin in Russia. With Putin in Russia, maybe it's a little too risky, but going with China, going certainly with Modi in India, yes, to exploit this undemocratic pole. But I think really it's very difficult for Israel. It is so dependent on and the West, both cultural level and on high tech and all these. It will be very, very difficult for Israel. It's not Russia. Russia has natural resources, huge territory. It could, Turkey the same. I don't see Israel really playing this card successfully. I think they are thinking about it, but I don't think they have a real possibility to play this card to the end.
The really fascinating thing about your piece is that notion that all of the things that you talk about in terms of the political cover that the U.S. provides Israel in the world's sort of international institutions, these things are not, for the most part, a function of political pressures that are exerted on Congress, right? Like where the funding would have to come from Congress. And the AIPAC has been pretty successful in playing in Democratic primaries and really disciplining individual Congress people within there just because of the sheer money that we're talking about. But this is money that is in a national election, I'm quite sure is more deployed along the lines of Republicans. And so if I'm a president, a Democratic president, I don't necessarily have these constraints when I know that the vast majority of people who are voting for me are, if you look at the Jewish population in this country, 75% will vote Democratic, and they are really unaligned with these things that are happening in Israel. There's a big contingent of very wealthy right-wing Jews in this country who are funding some of these things. But in terms of the freedom a president has to react to these things and to say, we're no longer, say to the State Department, we're no longer doing X, Y, or Z. This is all stuff that the executive has the ability to, and it's a completely different political calculation, one that I never really contemplated, frankly. And I really appreciated
this. This is again more American politics, which I understand a little bit less, but I understand what you're saying. And maybe this is why it makes Israel more fearful, because it knows that these are moves that the administration can decide without Congress and without the lobby, the Israeli lobby. And therefore, we've seen that with Obama, with the UN Security Council decision that he didn't veto just I think a month before ending his tenure in 2020. It was yes. And he didn't need Congress to do that. He just,
2016. It was 2016. But yes. Exactly. And I think it's interesting because
he just didn't veto a resolution, and this is something that yes, I think Israel did not forget. And
I don't know if the folks who are advocating for rights for Palestinians in this country, Jewish and non-Jewish, have been, if that movement to the extent that it exists in this country has not been focused on the executive branch, perhaps, and maybe because of a lack of that understanding, but it is a really interesting insight that maybe we'll see more of. Meron Rappaport, always, I learned so much in talking to you, and I really, really appreciate your coming on. We will check back with you again several months down the road to see if that opening, as you call it, has gotten wider, and maybe more people are starting to walk through it there. Thank you so much. We will link to your pieces at 972 and local call. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.